Isolde Devray was brilliant, poised, and destined for greatness, but when her mother, Marilyn Devray, was found dead in their quiet suburban home, the spotlight turned from admiration to suspicion. Reese Malvin, a shadowy financial advisor with a vanished past, had ties to both women, and a secret that could destroy them. What began as a tragic family loss soon spiraled into a web of forged documents, hidden identities, and a murder trial that would grip the nation. As chilling truths unraveled, one question echoed louder than ever. Who really killed Marilyn Devray? And why? The morning sky over Brindley Falls was painted in soft shades of gray when the call came in. A woman had been found unresponsive in her home on Hollow Birch Lane. The address was familiar. Everyone knew the Devray house. It stood like a white monument at the end of the street, tall, elegant, untouched by time. Inside it now lay the lifeless body of Marilyn Devray, a 47-year-old widow known throughout town for her refined manners and quiet charity work. She had hosted garden fundraisers, mentored troubled teens, and attended every community meeting with a calm, measured voice. But now she was gone. When emergency responders arrived, they found her body at the base of the grand staircase. Her head was twisted unnaturally, neck clearly broken. A shattered porcelain vase lay beside her, pieces scattered like frozen raindrops across the polished wooden floor. Nearby, a single candle burned in the kitchen, despite the house being cold and untouched. The kitchen clock had stopped at 10:14 p.m., but no one could say why. The initial assumption was that Marilyn had fallen. Perhaps she'd tripped, maybe while holding the vase, and snapped her neck in the fall. It had happened before to others. Accidents claimed lives all the time. But something about the scene nagged at the responding officer, a woman named Sergeant Marla Henth. She noticed how the vase's fragments didn't align with a natural drop. There was no blood trail, no stumble marks on the stairs, no overturned objects, indicating panic or loss of balance. And the candle, still burning, was out of place. Marilyn was meticulous. She wouldn't leave a candle burning while upstairs. As word of her death spread, shock swept through the community. That afternoon, her only daughter, 24-year-old Isolde Devray, returned from her graduate studies in the city. She arrived alone, dressed in black, eyes shielded by large sunglasses that stayed on even indoors. Neighbors approached her gently, offering condolences and casseroles, but Isolde barely spoke. She didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She stood by the fireplace as people wept around her, unmoved, unshaken, like marble in a storm. At the funeral, things felt even stranger. Dozens attended. Marilyn had touched many lives. There were teachers, doctors, old school friends, and even a few former students from the youth mentorship program she ran. Eulogies were shared, stories were told, and yet when people glanced at the front pew, they saw a daughter sitting motionless, her face unreadable. No tears, no emotion, just that same hollow gaze. The whispers began there, low and hesitant. She seems distant, someone said. Cold, another added, but no one dared say more. Grief wore many masks. 3 days after the funeral, the coroner's office released its findings. Marilyn had not died from the fall. The injuries were post-mortem. Before her neck had been broken, she had been suffocated. The bruising on her neck and the presence of skin cells beneath her fingernails told the real story. Someone had pressed the life out of her and then staged the fall. Investigators returned to the house and combed through every room. They interviewed the few friends Marilyn had mentioned recently, asked about her state of mind, and slowly pieced together a picture that didn't match the gentle widow the town thought they knew. The most crucial detail came from her neighbor, who mentioned hearing raised voices late that night. one sharp and angry, the other muffled. She couldn't make out the words, only the tension. The neighbor assumed it was a television show, but now, with Marilyn dead and a staged fall ruled out, that late-night argument took on a new meaning. Police began narrowing their focus. Isolde became a person of interest. She was the last known person to have stayed overnight in the house before Marilyn's death. There were no signs of forced entry, valuables stolen, no evidence of an outsider, just a quiet home, a dead woman, and a daughter who didn't cry at the funeral. The investigation had only begun, but one thing was already clear. Marilyn Devray's death was no accident. It was a carefully executed act, and someone close to her was hiding the truth. With the confirmation that Marilyn Devray had been murdered, the investigation deepened. Detectives turned their attention toward the people closest to her, starting with her only child, Isolde. The daughter's emotionless demeanor and her odd behavior at the funeral had already raised eyebrows. Now, investigators needed something more concrete. They began with Marilyn's personal belongings, documents, files, and digital records. In her home office, they found a safe hidden behind a bookshelf. Inside was an updated version of her will, dated just 4 weeks before her death. The contents of the will were unexpected. It named Isolde as the sole heir to Marilyn's estate, which included the Devray house, several investment accounts, a vintage jewelry collection, and a significant life insurance policy. What made this alarming wasn't just the complete transfer of assets to Isolde, it was the fact that an earlier version of the will had split everything evenly between Marilyn's daughter and her sister, Odessa Vine. No explanation for the change was included. There had been no known falling out between the sisters, but clearly something had shifted. Detectives flagged the new will as a potential motive. They reached out to Odessa, who was devastated to learn that she had been written out of the inheritance. She hadn't even known about the change. But what she did know, she insisted, was that Marilyn had become paranoid in recent months. According to her, Marilyn had complained that Isolde had changed drastically since returning from a 6-month trip abroad. Odessa described conversations in which her sister seemed afraid of Isolde's coldness, her unpredictable temper, and her increasing control over the household. Odessa mentioned something else. Marilyn had once confided in her about a secret journal she kept. Hidden somewhere in the house, she had written down her thoughts, fears, and experiences, especially the ones she didn't feel safe saying out loud. Investigators conducted a second, more thorough search of the house, focusing on Marilyn's bedroom. Behind a loose wooden panel in her closet, they found a leather-bound journal filled with narrow, slanted handwriting. The entries painted a disturbing picture. Marilyn had documented months of tension and unease. She wrote about Isolde watching her at night from the hallway. She described strange behaviors, missing objects, locked doors, cold silences, and a growing sense that she was not alone, even when Isolde wasn't home. In one chilling entry, Marilyn wrote, "I feel like prey in my own home." Another ended with the words, "She's waiting for something. I don't know what, but I can feel it." There was no direct accusation, no confession of violence, but the dread in her words was impossible to ignore. This discovery gave the investigation new momentum. The journal was examined carefully for fingerprints. Forensic experts confirmed that the pages had been handled by Marilyn and, more faintly, by Isolde. This placed Isolde in possession of knowledge about the journal's contents, or at least physical contact with it. Investigators believed it was a sign she knew more than she admitted. As detectives continued their work, they analyzed Isolde's computer and phone records. Her search history was unsettling. There were queries about inheritance laws, sleeping pills, and how to detect asphyxiation in autopsies. She had also been researching foreign financial accounts and how to open offshore trusts. One folder on her laptop was named Exit Strategy, filled with documents relating to new identities, overseas apartments, and digital currency transfers. When questioned, Isolde denied any involvement. She claimed the journal was fiction, a form of her mother's self-therapy. As for the search history, she explained it as research for a psychological thriller she was writing. The offshore accounts, just curiosity. Investigators couldn't pin anything directly on her, but the circumstantial evidence was building. The more they learned, the more suspicious the story became. Marilyn had changed her will. She had documented growing fear. She had died in her own home under suspicious circumstances. Isolde had motive, access, and a deeply disturbing trail of behavior. Still, there was no physical evidence linking her directly to the act of murder. But the case was far from over. A new development was about to emerge, one that would cast fresh light on the story and reveal that someone outside the family might be hiding a far more dangerous truth. As investigators struggled to build a solid case around Isolde, a new figure emerged from the shadows, someone who had been watching quietly from a distance. Calvin Straude. A name previously unknown to both the police and Marilyn's family, contacted the department and asked to speak with the lead detective. Calvin claimed he had dated Isolde during her 6-month trip abroad, and what he had to say changed the course of the investigation. Calvin brought with him emails, photographs, and even voice recordings, each pointing to a different side of Isolde. One far removed from the reserved academic image he portrayed. In the photos, she appeared carefree, even wild, posing in front of expensive hotels, at exclusive parties, and always surrounded by people with questionable backgrounds. In one email, she referred to herself as unbothered by blood ties. And in another, she described family as a temporary contract that can be terminated when no longer useful. He explained how, during their brief relationship, Isolde frequently spoke about wealth, power, and control. She mentioned her strained relationship with her mother and made cryptic remarks about wanting to be free from constant judgment. According to Calvin, Isolde became colder and more calculated over time. Their relationship ended abruptly when he began asking too many questions. But before it ended, she made one comment that stuck with him. I've already figured out how to erase people from my life, legally or otherwise. Investigators took Calvin's statements seriously. They verified his travel records and confirmed that he and Isolde had stayed at the same resort for nearly 2 weeks. Several guests remembered them. Ron bartender recalled how Isolde paid in cash for everything and always seemed to avoid being photographed, but that wasn't all Calvin brought. He provided screenshots of a private insurance policy in Marilyn's name, one that had not been included in the estate documents. This policy had been opened anonymously, with Isolde listed as the sole beneficiary. It had a payout clause in case of accidental death, and the signature on the documents was forged to appear as Marilyn's. For the detectives, this was a turning point. They obtained official copies of the policy and sent the documents for handwriting analysis. Experts confirmed that the signature was not Marilyn's. Someone had gone to great lengths to imitate her handwriting. The forgery, combined with the secret nature of the policy, indicated premeditation. Isolde is the only known person who stood to benefit, and now had 2 policies tied to her name. As the trial date neared, the prosecution began compiling everything: the updated will, the journal entries, the secret insurance policy, and Calvin's disturbing testimony. The media took hold of the story and labeled Isolde as the icy heiress, a young woman wrapped in mystery with a mind as sharp as glass. But then, just days before jury selection, something unexpected happened. A new witness came forward. Lunara Quillen, an elderly nurse who had occasionally assisted Marilyn during her migraines, reached out to the investigators. She claimed to have seen someone leaving the Devray home the night before the body was found. And it wasn't Isolde Lunara had kept quiet, afraid that her memory might not be taken seriously. But after seeing Isolde on the news, she realized the timeline didn't match. The figure she saw leaving the house that night was male, taller than Isolde, and moved with urgency. He had parked far down the street and was careful not to be seen. When asked if she recognized him, Lunara said no. But she was sure of one thing: Marilyn wasn't alone that night. With Calvin's damning evidence and Lunara's mysterious account, the case took another turn. Investigators began to consider a new possibility. What if Isolde wasn't the killer, but part of a larger plan? Or worse, what if someone else had orchestrated the murder and used her as a convenient suspect? The courtroom was now bracing for a case filled with misdirection, betrayal, and deep family secrets, and the deeper investigators looked, the more it seemed like someone very close to Marilyn had been playing a long, silent game. The introduction of the unknown male figure seen by Nurse Lunara Quiln shattered the narrow narrative built around Isolde Devray. Investigators, previously focused solely on the cult daughter and her damning digital footprint, now face the possibility of a deeper, more complex conspiracy. They began pulling security footage from homes near Hollow Birch Lane. One camera, perched above a neighbor's garage, caught a blurry silhouette moving past just after 10 p.m. on the night Marilyn was murdered. Though the footage was grainy and distant, the figure was clearly male, wearing a long coat and a cap. He moved quickly, head low, avoiding the streetlights. Detectives turned back to Marilyn's phone records, looking for any unfamiliar names or repeat contacts that didn't fit the usual pattern. One number stood out, registered to a man named Reese Malvin. He had called Marilyn several times in the weeks leading to her death. A background check revealed he was a financial advisor who had worked with high-risk offshore portfolios. He had no previous ties to the Devray family, at least none that were public. But further digging revealed something even stranger. Reese had once been involved in a fraud case with a woman named Jessa Illith, an alias that Isolde had used while overseas. Reese was brought in for questioning. He admitted to knowing Marilyn, claiming she had consulted him for financial advice. He denied ever meeting Isolde, but digital forensic analysis told a different story. His encrypted messaging app showed long conversations with someone saved as I. The messages hinted at a shared plan, using code words like release, inheritance, unlocked, and mirror switch. The language was vague but deeply suspicious. Investigators now suspected Reese wasn't just a consultant. He may have been involved in setting up the fake insurance policy and helping Isolde create an exit plan. The connection between them explained how such a complex forgery had been executed. But if Reese was involved in the murder, his motivations were unclear. Was he helping for money? Was he manipulating Isolde, or had he acted on his own? Then came a critical discovery. A storage unit registered under Reese's name contained a burner phone, a duffel bag with black gloves, and a duplicate house key to the Devray home. More alarming was a stained wool coat that, when tested, revealed traces of Marilyn's DNA on the sleeve. This was enough to obtain a warrant for Reese's arrest. However, by the time police arrived at his apartment, he had vanished. He had cleared out his belongings and left behind a single note that read, "She wasn't supposed to be there." Marilyn? Or was he referring to someone else? Could it mean that the murder was accidental, or had something gone wrong in a carefully laid out plan? And most disturbingly, was Isolde the mastermind, or was she a pawn? Meanwhile, inside the courtroom, the defense team for Isolde seized on Reese's sudden disappearance. They painted her as a misunderstood young woman manipulated by a professional con artist. They argued that Isolde may have known of Reese's financial schemes, but was unaware he would harm her mother. The media, which had once condemned her as the cold-blooded daughter, now began to speculate on whether she had been framed. Public opinion started to shift. Journalists dug up more about Reese: multiple identities, fraudulent bank accounts, and a history of seducing wealthy women under false names. He had once been charged with identity theft in another state, but escaped conviction due to lack of evidence. It became clear that he was a skilled manipulator with the ability to vanish without a trace. Despite this, prosecutors weren't ready to let Isolde go. The suspicious will, the forged policy, and her chilling journal entries kept her under scrutiny. It played some role, whether by collusion or silence. What had started as a simple murder case had now exploded into a twisted web of deception, greed, and shadowy players. As the trial neared its final stretch, one haunting truth became undeniable. No one truly knew who had killed Marilyn Devray or why. And the person with the answers was still out there, watching from the dark. The trial of Isolde Devray entered its final phase, with public curiosity at its peak and the courtroom packed every day. Cameras were not allowed inside, but the media coverage outside was relentless. Opinions were divided. Some believed Isolde was a cold-blooded killer, masking her motives behind intelligence and poise. Others saw her as a victim, caught in the grip of a manipulative con man who vanished the moment the truth threatened to surface. No matter where one stood, it was undeniable that Marilyn's murder was no longer just a family tragedy. It had become a national obsession. The prosecution focused on motive, opportunity, and intent. They reiterated the forged life insurance policy, the suspicious changes in the will, and Isolde had incriminating internet searches. The prosecutor reminded the jury that, despite the involvement of Reese Melvin, Isolde had maintained contact with him through encrypted channels, used aliases abroad, and taken steps to distance herself from her mother in every financial and emotional way possible. They painted her as the architect of a murder plan gone wrong, perhaps not the one who physically committed the crime, but the one who had ordered it. The defense countered with a narrative of manipulation and isolation. They argued that Reese had inserted himself into Isolde's life at a vulnerable time, feeding her paranoia and planting dangerous ideas in her mind. They emphasized her lack of criminal record, her academic achievements, and the absence of direct evidence tying her to the act itself. They highlighted the fact that Reese had the house key, Marilyn's DNA on his coat, and had run away, something an innocent man wouldn't do. In the final week of the trial, a shocking development threatened to dismantle everything. A package arrived at the district attorney's office, postmarked from a rural village in Eastern Europe. Inside was a USB drive, no note, no sender information, just the drive. Cautiously, it was opened under supervision. On the drive were 2 audio recordings and several scanned documents. The voice on the recordings was unmistakably Reese Melvin's. In the first recording, he confessed to being present the night of Marilyn's death. He said he had entered the home expecting to find it empty and had been startled when Marilyn appeared in the hallway. In his panic, he shoved her, and she fell, striking her head on a wooden bench. He claimed it had not been premeditated. He had gone there only to plant documents and stage a break-in. But when she died, he panicked and made it look like natural causes, hoping the body wouldn't be thoroughly examined. The second recording was darker. Reese revealed his long-standing resentment toward wealthy families who dismissed people like him. He confessed to using Isolde first to gain access to Marilyn's accounts, then to gather personal information. But over time, he began seeing Isolde as a liability. She was too smart, he said, too careful. I had to make her look like the one pulling the strings. The documents attached backed his story. Email sent from dummy accounts, detailed financial manipulation records, and journal pages written in his hand that matched the phrases later found in Marilyn's personal journal. Though the defense insisted this evidence proved Isolde's innocence, the prosecution pointed out inconsistencies. Why had Reese sent the package now? Why hadn't he turned himself in? Was this a final attempt to mislead authorities before disappearing permanently? Still, the recordings created reasonable doubt. The jury deliberated for 4 tense days. When they returned, their decision was unanimous: not guilty on the charge of first-degree murder. Isolde collapsed in her chair, overwhelmed. But the story didn't end there. In the months following the trial, Isolde withdrew from public life. She declined interviews, closed her social media, and sold the Devray estate. Rumors swirled about her whereabouts. Some claimed to have seen her in coastal towns under a different name. Others believed she had fled abroad. Reese Melvin was never caught. And while justice had technically been served, the truth still lived in the gray shadows between guilt and innocence. Marilyn Devray's murder was solved, but never truly understood. For those who followed the case, one question remained. Was Isolde truly a victim, or had she simply outsmarted them all?